Hey everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the latest Hurricane Tracker app video update recorded Monday, September the 10th, around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you look at the front page of the Hurricane Tracker app, you'll notice we have 3 hurricanes at one time, which is unusually rare for the Atlantic. You see this more often in the Pacific Basin, but nevertheless, we do have 3 hurricanes and a disturbance in the Caribbean that we're going to go and talk about today. I first want to talk about Hurricane Helene, which is the system that's farthest east. And it's a very well-defined hurricane. You can see it has a well-defined eye, plenty of thunderstorms and deep convection around the center. And we also have a well-established upper outflow air pattern. And over the next several days, Hurricane Helene is forecasted to become the 2nd major hurricane of the season. And it's going to be moving towards the west-northwest and eventually turn towards the north, harmlessly out into the open Atlantic. So after bringing tropical storm conditions to the Cabo Verde Islands, no further impacts to land are expected from this hurricane. The next hurricane on the list is Hurricane Isaac. And you can see Isaac is not as well defined as Helene is. There's no eye with this system. And throughout the day today, there's been a lack of organization. You can see the upper outflow pattern is not quite as well established as it was with Helene. But in the last few frames, as the sun is going down this evening, you can see there's much more convection, stronger thunderstorms beginning to develop around the center. And in fact, the National Hurricane Center does forecast that Isaac will approach wind speeds of 90 to 95 miles per hour as it tracks towards the Lesser Antilles. And we could see impacts across portions of the central and northern Lesser Antilles by the time we get into Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon. And then once Isaac moves into the central Caribbean, it's expected to encounter less favorable environments. There should be some increased wind shear. And the Hurricane Center does forecast Isaac to weaken pretty significantly. And then if you look at the computer models, most of the model guidance continues to weaken Isaac and brings the remnants into portions of Central America, which could be a concern we need to watch out for, as that could bring some mudslides, heavy flooding rains to portions of Central America. But right now, those of you in the Gulf of Mexico, there's no need to worry about Isaac. Of course, Harvey dissipated last year, if you remember, and reformed here in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. So we're not going to fully write off this hurricane until all the thunderstorms have diminished. But nevertheless, we'll keep an eye on it and we'll let you know if it becomes a concern. And last but certainly not least, and this is where we're going to spend most of the time on today's video, is Hurricane Florence. It is the most well-defined and organized out of all of them, unfortunately, because this is the hurricane that's going to be impacting portions of the southeast United States later this week. It rapidly intensified since yesterday. It is now a very powerful Category 4 hurricane. And you can see it started to gain a little bit of latitude, moving more towards the west-northwest versus the due west course that it's been on. But it's got a very well-defined eye and very strong thunderstorms around the core of the hurricane. Maximum sustained winds are, like I said, Category 4 status, 140 miles per hour. It's moving off towards the west-northwest at 13. And unfortunately, the hurricane is in extremely favorable conditions. There's no wind shear to speak of. The waters only get progressively warmer the further west the system moves. And therefore, the National Hurricane Center does forecast winds to peak around 150, maybe even 155 miles per hour. And I believe if it gets over 157 miles per hour, it would be a Category 5 hurricane. And that would mark the 3rd hurricane season in a row in the Atlantic Basin that we've had a Category 5. Whether it becomes a Category 5 or not, the impacts are still going to be the same. You can see the forecast track cone brings Florence into the southeast United States, anywhere from coastal South Carolina up through the Virginia Tidewater area. Major hurricane is forecasted around Thursday afternoon. And then once the system gets inland, it will begin to dissipate. And most of the computer model guidance does show that Florence could just kind of mull around and linger here for several days, dropping excessive rainfall amounts. So those of you inland here in the southern mid-Atlantic and the southeast, you definitely also need to keep an eye on Florence, even though it's going to be an extreme coastal event with major wind damage, extreme catastrophic storm surge, and we'll be measuring rainfall, unfortunately, in feet. So the track could still change a little bit. It could come a little further south into South Carolina, or it could move a little further north towards the Outer Banks, but that's something that we can't really pinpoint at this time, as it's still a few days away from impacting any land masses. Risk for tropical storm force winds here in southwestern North Carolina are up to 90%. Chances for 58 mile per hour or stronger winds here are greater than 70% chance. And hurricane force winds right now, and I expect this will only increase as we get closer in time, but right now hurricane force winds probabilities are running about 50 to 60% here in southwestern and portions of eastern North Carolina. There's the track of Florence. You can see it was moving off towards the west-northwest. We all thought it was going to be caught by a trough and turned out in the open Atlantic, but the trough turned out to be weaker than forecasted, and a stronger than forecasted ridge of high pressure is building north of the system and will push it west to the coast, unfortunately. Most likely time arrival of tropical storm force winds will be Thursday morning along the immediate coastlines of South Carolina and North Carolina. And some key messages from the Hurricane Center. As we stated, a life-threatening storm surge is likely along portions of the South and North Carolina and even Virginia coastlines. A storm surge watch along with a hurricane watch will likely be issued tomorrow morning, which is Tuesday. And all enters from South Carolina into the mid-Atlantic should ensure they have their hurricane plan in place. And of course, follow advice from your local officials. We can't stress that enough. They know your area the best. Follow local advice if there's, whether it's a voluntary or even a mandatory evacuation. And we've already seen some mandatory evacuations put up in portions of South and North Carolina. Life-threatening freshwater flooding from rain is also going to be a major concern over the inland portions of the Carolinas and the Mid-Atlantic for hundreds of miles, as we said, as Florence is expected to slow down as it approaches the coast. And damaging hurricane force winds are likely along portions of the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina. And of course, large swells will also be affecting Bermuda and the East Coast. So this will be a multi-high impact storm. Unfortunately, it could be on the levels of Hugo, and I hate to say it, but maybe even Andrew if wind speeds reach Category 5 status. So if you're in the area, if you're in or near the cone, again, don't focus on the forecast track and the dots on the line. Focus on the cone. If you're in or near the cone, you should have a hurricane plan in place and should be beginning to execute that plan. You can see plenty of warm waters here in the western Atlantic along the track, and rainfall amounts right now by the WPC, excessive amounts of rain, about 10 to 15 feet. Some areas could see more than 20 inches and some isolated spots. I want to go ahead and pull up some of our custom graphics that we make here and publish in the Hurricane Tracker app. So those of you in the high alert category, the 4, or those of you who should be executing your hurricane plan and getting your plans in place. And right now we have about a 95% chance that the system is going to impact somewhere in the Carolinas, 15% chance that it goes as far south as Georgia, and a 45% chance that the center would go up towards Virginia. But again, even though the center may not be tracking that far north, we are going to have impacts from some gusty winds and some inland flooding rains here across portions of Virginia. And so some key points: Florence is a powerful Category 4 hurricane, and winds are forecasted to peak again around 100, 155 miles per hour. It will cause major impacts to portions of South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. And again, we could see excessive rainfall. And bottom line, this is a dangerous hurricane. It's very well organized. It's not going to weaken, unfortunately, up until landfall. And we just want to make sure that you're taking this seriously, that you're prepared, and check in with the app for the latest data on this system. And also be sure to, again, heed advice from your local emergency management officials. We'll have another video update as conditions warrant. Thank you so much for using the Hurricane Tracker app, and have a wonderful evening.